Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is CM Alexander with the news. Derry has been victim to a series of break-ins over the past few weeks, which is why we're happy to be sponsored by Sentinel Homes from North Central Positronics. Their patented sentient secure technology will awaken the dormant spirit within your home, transforming it into a living, breathing guardian of your sanctuary. Intruders won't just face alarms or cameras. They'll face the gnashing teeth of a maw disguised as your front door. You're listening to Derry Public Radio. This is Derry Public Radio. Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King Book Club podcast. I am one of your hosts, CM Alexander, alongside Joshua Kahn.
Hey, everybody.
And Eve Gatto.
Hey, constant readers.
And today we are back with part 2 of The Wastelands, a Patreon selection by Lisa Kahn, and Josh is leading us through our discussion.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah.
Splitting this book into 3 sections is funny because this book is split into 2 parts.
Yeah.
That feel like different books.
Yes, so far. But so this is obviously kind of a weird episode because we're closing one book and beginning another. And yeah, because I just finished reading the ending again, listening to the audiobook on my way over.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm going back to start, I'm like, what? Where are we?
I'm glad it's not just me. Because I was like, why is this so hard?
Yeah, no, part 1 or book 1 or whatever he calls it, it feels like a self-contained story.
Mm-hmm.
It is, if he had released this as 2 separate, very short books, I would have loved it. It would have worked just as well.
Probably, yeah.
So yeah, when it reaches the second act and it's like, it's train time, it's a little jarring.
So where we left off from last episode is we're getting the quartet together. We've spent time fighting a bear in Midworld and fighting traffic in New York.
Question.
Yes.
Did we fight that bear in Midworld?
Yeah. Okay. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think I made a note about when it happened.
Yeah, because in my entire life. My like 3-4 times going through the Tower saga, in my head, it's just like, oh yeah, Midworld is like, Roland is from Midworld. Gilead was like the capital of Midworld. I don't know. And then when they reach that part where they cross the border, I'm like, oh, huh.
Yeah.
I guess Midworld's just like a country.
No, see, I think what it is, I think the world is Midworld, but it'd be like if Washington, D.C. was named Earth. You know, like, or like
Sure.
we were like the United States of Earth, because we're a country named after the planet.
See, what
God,
I like
what
to
a
think.
good name for a country. You're like, we're the best country because we're Earth.
Yeah.
Just like how the moon is just the moon. I like to think of it that it's they're traveling to a different reality, but the thinny is just a sign. They're
Could
just
be.
like, someone put up this sign to fuck with them.
Okay, since fuck this book, we're just going to talk about the geography of Midworld for a minute.
Sure.
Because I think part of this is also forgetting that the beams being at the edge of the world, they're at the edge of Midworld, not the whole world, because they've had to find them, like cross into that border. But anything that was outside of those beams has grown longer, essentially, as we said, distance has changed as the world moved on. But I don't think anything within that range has changed.
See, I think of it also as Midworld is kind of like a plane for Magic the Gathering. Bear with me.
Oh, no.
So planes in Magic the Gathering are like universes. Like, you can only travel between planes if you're a planeswalker. Your spark has been ignited and you can teleport, I guess, using magic.
Yeah.
In the old times before the Omen Whip paths opened up. Don't worry about it. But like, also each plane is just kind of like, it ranges between being an entire universe or, like in the case of Ravnica, it's just a big city. but it's also the entirety of existence in this plane. I don't
Okay.
know. So I imagine Midworld as being like they've crossed over into something else because reality is breaking down.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
Kind of overlaps in bubble universes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we get that in the next book.
That's true. So where we left off, it was the voices driving both Jake and Roland insane. Jake has realized that if he holds the key, that the voices go away. So he sent a message to someone. He doesn't know that it's Eddie, but we know it's Eddie, to tell Roland to take the key. And so that is where we are picking up with Eddie sitting up, thinking, all right, I hear this message. I'm going to get the key to Roland. And he thinks he's grasping at straws. And this approach doesn't go the way he thinks it will. Why is that?
I love this. He walks up and he's like, oh, Roland's not doing good, because he's 4 steps away from Roland before Roland realizes he's there. And he recognizes that, like, even when he was sick from the lobstrosity bite, he still would have sensed that Eddie woke up
Yeah.
before even Eddie was awake. But he is so completely out of it, and he wakes Roland up and he's like, hey, how you doing, bud? And Roland's like, I'm dying. I'm like literally I am preparing to die because my brain is being ripped apart.
The idea that he says, do you know what I hope is the clearing at the end of the path? Silence.
Okay, I can relate to this weirdly because I once had an inner ear thing and I woke up at 3 a.m. and it sounded like a siren was going off inside my head.
Oh, I hate that.
I could barely talk because I couldn't hear my own voice, and I had to go to the emergency room, and it just wouldn't stop. It didn't, when your ears ring, it'll go away after a minute. And I felt it so loud and for so long that I was like, I get why people want to die, like people who have tinnitus that's really bad that never goes away, because it's so overwhelming and persistent. And so to imagine having something like that going on in your head, except it is a memory version of that, where you're having these experiences, is just insane. And I also just want to add real quick, I love that Eddie is upset by the fact that Roland is bad off, and not yet in a caring way necessarily, or that at least doesn't come to the forefront because they're still sort of reluctant companions. But like Roland is his security blanket almost, both of theirs, because it's his world and he knows more about it. So it's that fear of, oh my gosh, the person who's keeping us alive is not doing well, but also they're not even really there willingly necessarily.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to see the relationship continue to evolve in strange ways.
Which it's also crazy where we end up with Eddie by the end of this part of reading.
Yes, I love that.
Here.
Yeah.
He lets the voice of Henry get to him for a minute, but is like, Roland, trust me. This might seem crazy, and Roland's like, I will do anything crazy. Just tell me to do something. And he tells him to take the key, so he slides it off and gives it to him, and the voices get quiet.
I love that when Eddie's like, I've been making something, Roland's like, oh yeah, I know. Are you finally gonna show me? Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
And of course, Roland reads Eddie to filth, like, simply because like throughout this whole section, he just immediately senses Eddie's insecurities and asks him, Henry talks to you a lot, doesn't he? And Eddie's like, shut up, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a tough guy.
Yeah, but and he, I think, doesn't he admit that it's less? Eddie gets surprisingly vulnerable when asked direct questions, He's a very honest guy.
Yeah.
I feel like. That night, Roland weeps because he has silence, and he sleeps clutching the key like a security blanket.
Yeah.
That's absolutely what it is.
Baby boy.
Jake, on the other hand, has a pretty kick-ass King dream sequence.
Okay,
CM?
I'm imagining this like, have you guys seen John Dies at the End?
Yes.
Okay,
The
I'm
book's
picturing.
fantastic.
Oh, I love the book. And for some reason, like I watch the movie once a year.
Nice.
I don't know why it makes me feel good. It's not. It's a complicated movie. Anyway, there's a scene in this that just it's the final one in the basketball court, oddly enough,
Mhm.
and I'm just picturing this like weird, like it's day, but the sky is like dark red and stormy,
Yeah.
and it's almost like being in another world. And Jake
Mhm.
he's making his way through the city,
Mhm.
and he comes across a stone marker with the words "Traveler beyond lies midworld." And he eventually runs into what we'll come to know is Eddie playing basketball in a basketball court. And he has some interesting guidance for Jake. That's like, it's because is Eddie having this too? Or is that kind of
Right.
left uncertain? Because like later around the fire, much later, the way Roland described it made me think they were
Mhm.
sharing this.
Yeah, because later during the uh, surprisingly good exposition dump at the end of the section, yeah, Roland says that they've been living each other's lives in
Dreams,
their
yeah.
sleep or whatever.
Yeah.
It implies that Eddie and Jake have this strange psychic connection.
Yeah. So Eddie basically is telling Jake that he needs to find a portal, like we saw with the bear, and that is going to guide him, and that Eddie's there to help Jake do that. And he's like, hey, if you just try really hard, it's gonna work out, man, because
If you want to find me bad enough, you'll find me.
yeah, and you can find Roland again too. And that's I love Roland and Jake's relationship.
Yeah, it's complicated. It sure is.
Mhm.
But it makes sense. Like it's the companion he needs.
Oh, and Eddie also answered the riddle. Aaron Deepnow's
The river.
Deep No?
Yeah.
Deep No.
Deep now. Yeah, the riddle was the answer was a river. What is it? Death and water are the answer to all riddles.
Oh, that's I should like riddles.
It's a D&D rule.
Oh, and when Jake wakes up too, he has physical signs of the dream.
The skin, yeah, he has skinned knees. So Jake gets up and packs his bag, steals his father's gun, and then
so
leaves
crazy.
the most appropriate
Yes.
note for this family. He stands there and goes back and forth about what he should write, and decides that the only genuine, real thing he could write is, "Mom and Dad, please take care of yourselves. Love, Jay."
Yeah, he's like, I love you. Nah,
No,
not
that's
right. I'll miss you. Too sad.
It is kind of depressing, but also uplifting, because Stephen King does not make you like his parents at all.
Mm.
They're just so self-absorbed and neglectful of him.
Of course, he had to make them unlikable because he's sending a character to a crazy. Like he has to make this going back to the crazy post-apocalyptic world
staying,
to hang out with the cowboy that killed him seem like a good idea.
2 days pass for our quartet, and Roland has been wearing the key around his neck, which means Eddie has not been working on it. In fact, Eddie doesn't want to work on it anymore. He knows he needs to because he knows it's not done.
Do you think if Eddie still had the key in his possession, he would have an urge to keep working on it?
I don't think so. I think the insecurity is really
You
at
don't
the end
think the
what's gotten the
power
better
of
him.
it, whatever it's doing to Roland,
Would convince
some
him
sort
to
of
work.
effect? Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Ka?
Okay,
Nailed it.
It doesn't matter whether Eddie would have had it or not. Ka would have put obstacles in the way, so he had to go through the city.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, now Eve already warned me, and CM, I've known you long enough that this is going to be a whole thing. So I'm just gonna. We meet our first Billy Bumbler.
Love them. I want one.
Yes.
Tell me about not how a Billy Bumbler is even described in the book. Tell me when you close your eyes, you're Billy Bumbler.
In my head, it's like a cartoonish possum, but with a springy pigtail.
Similar. And Eve, actually, the colors you're wearing are the Billy Bumbler colors.
Yes.
It's black, gray, and white.
Mm-hmm.
And he's stripy. And I'm also kind of picturing like a raccoonish sort of creature. I imagine them to have little hands.
See, are they
that they can
stripy
eat with.
all over their body, or is it just their tail? Does it say? Because did you ever have a nightmare in your childhood so terrible that it seared its image into your brain forever?
Several times.
Yeah, I had a nightmare when I must have been like 5 or 6. I was a small child where the closet in my hallway leading to my bedroom in my childhood home, I walked past it and opened the doors, and there was this little creature that was about 3 feet long and about a Billy Bumbler tall that was black and white stripes, and it was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I can picture it. If I were better at drawing, I could draw this fucking thing. And it's weird that that's kind of how I picture a Billy Bumbler, except cute, and I love it.
I said on our stream, so listeners, if you didn't watch our stream, you didn't miss anything because now I'm going to tell you what I said. That Oi is my favorite Stephen King character.
It's so insane.
And it's so nice, though, because this is skipping ahead a little bit, but the introduction of Oi and the relationship he has with Jake, just, it's like, thank you. Thank you for giving this fucking kid Oi. It brings comfort to the reader, I think, in a really nice way. It brings like this sweetness and innocence.
It makes Jake not like an invalid by comparison, because he's already a child amongst 3 adults, but by having Oi there, something that he can take care of, something that he is responsible for protecting, it makes him realize that he can stand with the rest of them.
And
they're all content.
It's something unique about him that I kind of didn't realize until you said, he's a child among these adults who have all this like more wisdom and experience than he would have. But having this creature who is like a kind of a relic of before the world moved on, as we come to find out, show up for Jake specifically, it makes Jake more of that special character, almost like if there's a heart of any group, like he would be the heart of the group, and Oi is the symbol of that for us.
That, and we, not in this section, but as the series goes on, the fact that Oi basically has a character arc. Because when we first meet this Billy Bumbler, Roland's like, it's just a fucking Billy Bumbler, whatever. We used to have him around the castle all the time. They're,
like
not
dogs,
as loyal as a dog,
but,
They're
but
like cats.
Yeah, yes, they're like cats. Like, they'll hang around, but they just want the food, and then they'll fuck off or whatever. And when we learn that they talk, Roland is very dismissive of it, and he's like, oh yeah, no, they're just parrot. They just parrot whatever they hear. And we don't get it here. Well, even really by the end of this section, maybe not this section, but eventually we get to where like
that's more than
just mimicry.
Yeah.
Also very important, they don't taste good.
Yes.
So it's not, because I think Eddie was like, oh, is this food?
And Roland's answer is, I'd rather eat dog. And they go, have you? And he's just like, nods silently, and it's like, oh, cool.
Ooh, Billy Bumbler burrito. Oh, sorry. We get gunslinger burritos.
The gunslinger burritos,
did that make you guys like? I really wanted, if you've ever gone to a Korean restaurant and you cook your own meat on the table, and it's like really thinly sliced, and then you dip it in something and you wrap it in a sunflower leaf and you eat it.
So
that's
good.
what I was picturing, and I was like, I want some gunslinger burritos.
Let's go get some gunslinger burritos.
Let's call everything we eat gunslinger burritos.
Something that I just, not very important, but Eddie is now starting to experience kind of what Jake experienced, remembering forward in time, but in the past.
It's not driving him crazy.
No, because because he was unaffected by the timeline shift. This now corrected timeline is solid for him. Because he knew some of what Roland had said, but I believe it mentions earlier that when he would think about the different version Roland had said earlier, it felt like it had teeth, and he would be like, nope.
Yeah. And he only remembered the things he said to him on the beach. He's like, I don't remember you talking about the boy. I remember you talking about what you did, which wasn't finding anybody, which was really disturbing. We didn't really talk about that last episode, but it made me feel anxious.
Yeah. And so he's basically saying, I seem to remember when I was 14, there was this kid. He followed us to the mansion. And the note that I had about the mansion is that the way it's described reminded me of Heron's Roost. This
Yeah.
big building that is vandalized. It's decrepit on the outside, but nothing on the inside has been touched because no one can get near it.
From Doomickey, in
Yeah.
case anyone hasn't read that.
This is where I have the note. They find a road marker to Midworld, a place I forgot we weren't already. Yes, it says that Midworld was one of the largest kingdoms in the land.
Sure.
Passing by an empty building, Susanna says that it looks like it's haunted, and Roland just flatly says, I wouldn't be surprised, and moves on, which I love.
Which is insane. Okay, this is jumping ahead a little, but it is something that made me go, really? Later on, or throughout this section, Roland keeps thinking about how much Eddie reminds him of Cuthbert, his old gunslinger friend from long, long ago.
My favorite gunslinger.
Everyone's
Yeah.
favorite gunslinger. He's awesome. I bought bird skull earrings.
Hell yeah!
Like last week specifically because of Cuthbert.
Yes.
But he keeps saying Cuthbert. He describes Cuthbert as the kind of person who said he would believe in ghosts when he caught one.
With
and
his
Eddie's
teeth.
like, yeah, with his teeth, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And Eddie's like, hell yeah. And I'm like, you just got cucked by a demon. What are you talking about? Ghosts are where you draw the line.
That's amazing.
Anyway, that's jumping ahead a little bit.
That is a good point. Jake decides he needs to kill time. I can't remember if I'm pretty sure he was in Manhattan, so he needs to go to Brooklyn. So to kill time, being in the city, he doesn't want to stand out. So he goes to a museum where there is a school tour happening, and he just kind of joins it.
He has a very weird afternoon where he's trying not to be noticed, but he's surrounding himself with people. And then has to make up like all these weird lies on the spot
really funny.
as people notice him, which generally isn't a problem until a police officer asks him, what's up?
It's so good. He sits there and he's like, of all the places that a cop had to walk by and he has to see me, thankfully, he has a slightly psychic key. And that's a Doctor Who reference for Whovians. Doctor Who has slightly psychic paper, and he just holds it up and he's like, I believe you'll find that we're allowed
it's whatever
here.
document.
And he'll hold it up, and then whoever's looking at it will interpret what authority they see.
And that's basically what Jake does with the key to get out of the cop, asking him why he's not in school, which I love because it's such a it's like a moment. It's a Stephen King moment in this book.
Yeah.
Because it's so fantastical.
You know what it reminds me of is Jack.
Yeah.
Where
Black House Talisman.
Yes, Talisman, where he has this like bit of a glow to him that when people run into him, they just like stare and they're like, oh, this kid's special in some way. It doesn't really say that, but that's kind of what I imagine, because all of these little incidents of people being like, what are you doing here? And everything he says is just bought like immediately without him trying.
And he notices that when he holds up the key, he's been talking to the cop while he's holding it, and a crowd is starting to gather, and he realizes that he needs to get the hell out of here pretty quick. So he slinks off and makes his way to Brooklyn with no idea what to do next. Back in Midworld, Susanna sees that there is a world beyond the forest. We see the Great Road, the Seine River, and a herd of animals that could or couldn't be mutated. We can't tell from this distance, and a massive city.
That's so insane. Just because of how the landscape has been described, and all of the towns that Roland has passed through are so like old westy, like not advanced. And there's this city.
So I wrote down this line because earlier we had the moment with Eddie after he gunslings his ass off killing baby robots, and he thinks, I wouldn't go back now if an opportunity was there. I feel it. This is the moment for Susanna because she looks at this skyline, and the line is she wouldn't go back if she could either. Quote, The silent mystery and the empty spaces were intoxicating. She's fallen in love with this world.
It's so cool
Yeah.
because Eddie, when he sees the city, though, and this is going to come up several times, he's not excited because he thinks there's a door to get home. He's excited because he's like, oh, a city. Maybe there's a hot shower. Well, he doesn't say that, but that's what I would say.
Yeah.
He's like, maybe there are people who can help us, supplies we can get. Very reasonable in general, but based on the whacked out shit that has happened to him since he came here, I would be like Susanna, but I think I'd also be terrified to be like, oh no.
Going into that would be one of the scariest things of, you know, if you fell down a rabbit hole, found yourself in a magic fantasy world, approaching a city. It seems like there are so many things you can do wrong so fast.
Okay, I don't want to be weird, but their journey to the city, and as they're getting closer and closer in the part we're covering, I'm imagining our Girl Underground episodes on Patreon.
Yeah.
Listeners, if you don't know what we're talking about, just sort of that. I don't know, like having this almost medieval journey, and then everything sort of comes together and gets like big and crazy.
Yeah, it's so nice. I fucking love this book. So Roland's gaze, however, is not on any of these things. It's fixed on the fuck circle down the hill. You
mean the cuck circle?
The cuck circle. Yeah. What happens is the cuckening and inside the fuck circle. So he sees it and he thinks, oh, I almost had to fucking oracle to death in one of those not too long ago.
You know, I'm starting to think that he likes this.
I mean,
oh no.
He does start quipping about it.
He does.
He goes on to, he points it out, and of course they're immediately like, oh, Stonehenge, which is kind of cool to get, because he did have Jake. Well, he saved Jake from it.
Yeah.
Jake was mesmerized.
But getting their reaction to be like, oh, that's a weird echo of a thing from our world.
Yeah.
But he explains, like, there's a demon in there, and that's where we gotta go.
Eddie's the one who realized. Eddie's the one who's like, I think that's where we need to go, and I'm gonna need that key back because we have to start running.
Yeah, and
so
Roland's
terrifying.
like, well, shit, because there's a demon in there, and we're gonna have to fuck it.
Oh my god.
What friendship test?
Susanna's immediate reaction is, well, Susanna is like, we gotta fuck it, right?
Well, he's trying. He's like, we don't have time to beat around the bush. I don't have time to put this delicately. And she's like, we're gonna fuck it. Because he's trying to explain, okay, if the demon could be male or female, it could change. So depending, you gotta.
Yeah.
Susanna goes, what if it swings both ways? And he goes, then we'll both go. And I'm like,
And that begs the
based.
question, like, how good of friends are you? Would you tag team a demon if you had to?
CM.
I would, yes. I'd
on.
tag team a demon for anybody at this
CM,
table.
grow up. Come
Yeah,
on.
grow up, CM.
Okay.
Grow up, CM. Come on now.
Damn it. Bring that back. This is the worst moment ever.
But the fact that Roland is like, well, we'll turn the spirit into a Chinese finger trap, and then smirks.
Wait, and then what?
And then smirks.
Oh,
He's
I
just
thought
like,
you said and then squirt. That is so upsetting. It's so upsetting and aggressive. But it came from me. I did it to myself. Shit.
This is a good episode.
oh my goodness, that's terrific. The shame that washed over your face when I saw the reaction now makes sense based on what I now know you heard.
I physically reacted to that.
Oh,
That's so good. They head for the circle. They're gonna make their plan. Meanwhile, Jake sees a Clint Eastwood movie poster and thinks it reminds him of Roland, specifically the eyes.
And that's Stephen King's inspiration, as we know. So it's a cool moment.
And he, staring at this poster, he thinks, will you let me die this time?
Oh, it's so sad.
Oh, yeah. It's the fact that he has to ask that question and still feels the compulsion of Ka to be a part of this has got to be a hard thing to parse. Jake hears voices from behind him and realizes it's a 14-year-old Eddie Dean. Now, I know we talked about this in another episode about the timeline of when all of these people exist
Yeah.
at the same time. But I remember my first time through reading this, and the dream reveals that it was going to be Eddie, and the idea that technically Jake is older than Eddie is very funny.
Well, and is he actually? Because then this
Oh
made
no,
me
Jake
think
is
I had
11.
it. Yeah,
Eddie is
Eddie's
still
like
older. So
2
Jake's only
years
3
older.
years younger than Eddie.
Yeah, because I think in the previous book I had said Jake's time was earlier, but it was just earlier in linear time.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So Jake watches Eddie and Henry, and we learn kind of a lot about watching Eddie and Henry as opposed to hearing Eddie describe Eddie and Henry. How did you guys feel about that?
I loved that Jake immediately had Henry pegged.
Yeah.
And because Eddie has described him to us through rose-colored glasses. And, people who have had life experiences, like, recognize the red flags in this. Reading this as a teenager, though, of course I didn't. So I do remember the way this hit me then. And it still had almost that same power because Henry's thinks he's flirting with a pretty girl.
Oh, yeah.
And is basically teasing her and being just horrible, just being awful and not at all charming. And Jake keeps thinking, man, that kid from my dream was so nice. Why is he hanging out with this douchebag? And then when they turn around, he sees that the family resemblance. But it shows too, because Jake is younger and he's also been described as looking younger than his actual age, and it shows how impossibly he has an old soul.
Yeah, he's very perceptive. I think because he's so ignored by most people, he sees everything. And there's Henry bullies some kids at the park.
Trips little kids who are just running around the playground.
And he hears Eddie start asking about going to see the mansion, and he's like, all right, go ask mom for some money for us to get a snack or whatever, because she'll give it to you and then we'll go. And I love this momentary jealousy that Jake gets for the night that the Deans will have after this, the normalcy that awaits them, and knowing that by the end of this night, he's committed to never going home. He knows he's been so sure every door leads to Midworld, but now he's sure.
Yeah.
Something's gonna lead him there. Meanwhile, back in the circle, it's a male fuck demon. Congratulations, Susanna.
Sorry, I don't like my voice.
Do you need a minute, CM? Are you okay?
I love the way it's described, which I know sounds weird. Because it's, Roland's like, we might need a little bit of Detta. Is she in there?
Yeah.
And she is. And I love my Detta.
Roadhouse champion, Detta Walker.
Yeah. And it feels weird to appreciate that because that means she's got some amount of control in the situation, weirdly.
To me, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
You're fine.
It's so crazy because this is going to be a moment that I go against what we said last episode, which was somebody could approach the series from this book forward because of the great recap it does. So I don't think you'd get the appreciation for this moment if you didn't know the vileness of Detta Walker,
Yeah.
It's weird that was so terrible and horrible to read, but now I kind of appreciate it. I'm just throwing it out there.
I find this part, it's compelling because there's a fuck demon.
Sure.
But I find it weird that the character arc our characters get in this this section of the book. Roland goes from being the solitary, self-independent to realizing that Eddie and Susanna are basically his equals now, even though he is still teaching them. They are gunslingers, and that Eddie has this arc of being still hung up on his brother and his insecurities and working through his fear of not being good enough to complete this key. Susanna's arc is she fucks a demon. Did I miss anything?
To play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
She has been known to use her sexuality in a very specific way. And here she is using it, what felt to me like consciously, so more consensual. I mean, I'm stretching. It's a horrible situation, the thing she has to do, but just kind of giving her a little more autonomy and dignity in the moment. I look at it as she's not like Detta's not taking over and she doesn't know what's happening. She's drawing on the strength of that part of her, even though it was such a dark and, seemingly overall negative part of her. So she's drawing on that to use it. And she is the female in the moment whose body is making Jake's birth into this world possible.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's her participation in his...
Because Eddie is constantly described as the midwife of the birth.
Yep. He's guiding him out.
Susanna's kind of the mother.
And Roland's sitting there telling her to do her Lamaze.
Yeah, Roland's jerking off in the corner.
So as you were talking...
I want to read Eve's version.
That the idea that Susanna used, it's almost redemptive. She used the vilest part of Detta and used it for good.
Yeah, it's like making purpose of this darkness.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But while the demon is being fought, the great thing about also how the fighting goes is that obviously it attacks her and it is immediately painful. It is explicitly said there's no pleasure any moment
there's no
of
foreplay.
this. Yeah, exactly. He just runs right in. And when she
I hated that.
Full speed, man.
Yuck.
Well, I love the way this is described, which is what I said like 5 minutes ago. Just because of the visual aspect of it. Because she's kind of on her back, and eventually Roland is sort of supporting her upper back, like he's just holding her as emotional support. Wonderful moment when he does that, because she is kind of on her own, and there is that like flare of hatred, which I think you would feel towards the dudes who don't have to fuck this huge dick demon, which is how it's described. But and you see her clothes like kind of being pressed into her body, and she can feel she can't see anything, but she can feel it trying to do its thing.
Yeah. And Roland had said sex is its weapon, but it's also its weakness. And what she does is she reaches her hand up around what would be the back of its neck. And instead of like gripping it to pull it away, she pulls it in closer. And then she starts fucking the demon, and it can't get out because it's getting fucked.
Yeah, it's weakness.
Yeah.
And it catches it off guard.
Yeah.
It expected to be fought.
The fact that it begs to be let go several times is also fantastic. That it is trying to get away, but also cannot pull itself away. Jake gets inside the mansion.
Oh my God.
Spooky, creepy. He finds the door, finds the key. Then the house comes alive.
Oh, I just had a horrible thought.
Yeah.
I hope the message is not "fuck your rapist."
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like the way it was put. I was like,
let's not. Let's say
rape
that's
your
not
rapist.
Anyway, let's go to the house, because the house is
really cool.
It is really cool. Rape that house.
No, what?
I don't know.
Jake has the house starts creaking and groaning, and a face starts to come pushing through the wall, and he starts to realize that it's not something that is going to come through the wall, it is the wall coming to him. And he sees the door he needs to go. This creature is clawing after him, pulling itself from the plaster. He gets the key in the lock after he drops it through the fucking floorboards first, and then he gets it up, opens the door, knowing the world is going to be there, to find dirt
and worms.
This whole action sequence is so goddamn cool, because of course when he reaches this place, it's an old dilapidated house. In my head, it was the house on Nebel Street. And so you're like, oh, there's gonna be something bad in there. He's gonna go in and there's gonna be some fucking monster, who knows. But the fucking house tearing itself apart and becoming this jagged, splintered it's so scary. And if you have not seen the drawings in the illustrated edition, you should look them up, because they're scary.
I will absolutely do that.
Oh, is it here where Jake hears Roland's voice when he's trying to get the key?
He's trying to pick the key up,
Yeah, telling him to pull the other board.
Yeah, pull the other floorboard, because he's been so focused.
And he's like trying so hard, and that one's actually loose that he almost flies backward.
It's so good. Eddie has taken a sharp stick and he drew a door that started to become solid.
Beetlejuice style.
Yeah, Beetlejuice style. and he puts the key in the lock. It won't budge, not even a millimeter. And he realizes that it's not right. So he asks Roland for his knife, and Roland puts it in his hand, and it's just the tiniest sliver off that S. We said the S curve was going to be important. That's what it was. And Roland, meanwhile, yells at Susanna to let go of the demon when I tell you, and no more information.
Oh, when Eddie opens the door, he sees Jake being drugged backwards by the house monster.
Yeah, and it's the perspective is so strange because they are looking down, but Jake is looking forward.
Yes, my brain
so
can't.
cool.
Yeah.
My brain can't. I keep trying to picture it and nothing.
Yeah. Roland grabs Susanna and swings her vagina towards the door, says, let it go. And it flees from her, flies straight into the plaster demon's mouth, and gets theoretically jammed in its throat.
Yeah, it flies into him so hard that it chokes it.
Yeah. And Roland fucking dives into this door, gravity be damned, and fires off some shots, frees Jake, grabs him. They hustle back to the world. Roland and Jake embrace.
Sans one pair of pants.
Yeah, Jake's pants come
R.I.P.
off. I love the scene
Rest in
of
pants.
Yes.
nice. I love the scene of them pulling them through the door because they have to pull them up through the door.
Yeah.
And Roland's got Jake, and Eddie. Is it Eddie who grabs Roland's hair?
Yeah.
He ends up pulling a chunk of his hair out. Is just
Yeah.
lifting him up.
Yeah,
It's
they
very tense.
Claw their way out of that door, and then the door slams shut. Oh, and the door said the boy on it.
Yeah, that was the thing that made the door real, because he was like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? I remember, label it.
Yep. And the door goes back into the dirt, and they're all together.
And the first thing that Jake asks Roland is if he will
Can I get a pet?
drop him this time.
Yeah, and Roland promises he will never let anything happen to Jake.
And immediately he's like, fuck. I don't know that that's a
Boy.
promise I can keep.
That when it's like the deepest part of him thinks, don't know that I can. It's so dark. 4 days pass. Jake wakes up to our Billy Bumbler that we will get to know and love, who has been attacked by his own kind. He's got a wound and he's half starved. And Jake asks if he can feed him, and Roland says, you'll never get rid of him. And we never will.
Which is great. And I love that Jake's trying to get him to come to him. And he wakes up with him licking his face. And he's like, you know, if this had happened a day ago, I would have woken everybody up screaming.
Yes.
And it's just cute because when Roland comes up to see what's going on, he doesn't scare Oi away or anything. But when Eddie's like, hey, what's going on? Oi runs away. And then Jake turns to look at him and says, like, with accusation, hey, which is so relatable. I'd have been like, you scared it away, you jerk.
Yeah.
Also, important to note, Oi yells ass.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, he does yell ass.
Instantly making me love him.
Oh, we should explain for anybody who's just listening to this. Oi is the name that the Billy Bumbler ends up getting because Roland's explaining to Jake that they can talk, but they just repeat what you say. And Jake's, saying like, here, boy. And the part that he repeats ends up just being Oi.
Yeah.
And so that becomes his name, which is so cute.
So cute.
As
I
they
love him.
as they get closer to Lud, they start hearing the drumming and have no idea what it is, but it's coming from the city.
God drums.
Yes.
That's so cool.
And Susanna here suggests that they detour around the city. And I liked Roland's response of detouring is a bad habit.
It really
That's sick.
sets the stage for later in a neat way.
It's also, part of me wonders if Roland just really does not want to leave the beam now that he's found it. I get that you can hopefully find your way back, but
I think it has to do with the world expanding because if you get off the path of the beam, who knows what could seem like going around the city might take you somewhere crazy.
True. As they make their way through this beat to shit town that they're passing through, Roland throws a rock at a sign, and it's an old school traffic light, which is great. And these two old people call out in the high speech, and they saw the old man saw the gun and was hoping that it was what he saw, and the reaction of everybody seeing someone outside themselves see a gunslinger is really
It
fucking
is
cool.
really
Yeah.
cool. They're described as extremely old. And they're
Yes.
not just old, they're like ancient. Sai and Mercy. And Mercy is blind
Mhm.
because this is a violent world and somebody gouged out her eyes.
A branding iron. They put a branding
Ooh.
iron to her eyes. But Roland does flirt with her a little bit, which is
That's so nice. I love
Seeing,
him.
yeah, when he starts interacting with these
And he's charming.
strangers, yeah, Eddie and Susanna see him and he's like, oh, this is the real Roland. This is how Roland was before. How do they put it? Before he was alone and became like strange,
turned inward on himself.
Yeah.
and became strange.
Yeah, because being isolated makes you weird.
Mhm.
I love too, we didn't mention it, but that when they're walking through this area, Roland tells them that they've been being watched for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And Susanna's like, how do you know that? And he's rattles off like all these, makes it sound like really obvious signs. And then he explains that it's a feeling too. It's like the sun going behind a cloud and you're in shade for a second. And later she feels that feeling.
And he says that as you're
Yeah,
training, you
she'll
will
get
start to
it.
notice this too. You'll start to see it. They share their quest for the Dark Tower with these two people, and the old couple invite them to stay.
Well, as they're standing here, it always starts to bark.
Yeah.
So he already shows his worth as like, part of the team on guard. And the Aunt Talitha, her and the rest of the group come out. And again, Roland just shows like this formality with her, like this respect. That's
Yes.
really cool.
It's the classic, like, oh, what is a beautiful young lady like you doing here? And
Yeah.
she's like delighted, and it's so cute.
He calls people beauty.
Yeah.
And
Well, she hasn't had the woman's curse for about 50 years. 50 years past.
It's cool too that their hideout, because as they were first entering the town, Roland was explaining, like, I saw a windmill back
Mhm.
there, and then
There was a
you can-
garden.
yeah, the
hidden behind
gardens.
bushes.
Yeah, they're like making it look like there's nothing here, but there really is. And so they go into this old church that's clearly not being
The
used.
Church of Blood Everlasting. That
Right.
It's
fucking
dark.
rules.
And just like, the garden being hidden, their true dwellings are underneath all of that hidden.
You know what this little town gives me the most? It gives me such Fallout vibes.
Yeah.
It's just a tiny settlement with
Yeah.
a few people, and they're all old for some reason. And yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's the town of the old people that you go to and
Big town.
find exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's where the pubes live.
No, the pubes live.
No, that's Lamplight.
That's Lamplight. Yeah. Big town is where you go when you turn 18.
Yeah, that's right. Don't worry about why I said pubes just now. The book says it so many times.
But this scene where they are, hospitality being shown to them.
Mhm.
We also haven't seen Roland be treated with hospitality really ever.
Yeah.
So
Zoltan.
That's true. Yeah. He gives a beautiful toast at this dinner, and it makes several of the people cry. And I really enjoyed that. They feast, they hold palaver, and they have everybody leave with their coffee except for the albino twins, the Aunt Talitha and Sai,
Mhm.
and then the quartet. And they ask about history. We get a lot of lore dump here. So who would like to share their favorite bit of lore we get about the city and the history of this area?
The war
Yeah.
between the Greys and the pubes.
Which I yes, it sounds ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
But right before, Roland even says that the story they tell is one that's too eerily familiar to be coincidence, because it sounds just like the fall of Gilead. But when he mentions like John Farson, those names don't mean anything to these people. So it is whole new names and powers, but it's the same story.
Well, and too, we know that at least like 100, he thinks 100 years passed after
Yeah.
he met up with Walter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's like way in their past. And who
True.
knows how time has been moving
Right.
since then.
That was
too.
100 years back on the beach.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
didn't talk about the watch, Jake's
No,
watch
we
that he
didn't,
brought
yeah.
with. They do say it's a like Seiko, right?
Mhm.
So I imagine it's a digital
Yes.
watch.
Yeah.
Because if it was just a normal wristwatch, I'm like, that's not how clocks work. But he has a digital watch that he checks, and it says that it's a date that doesn't exist, and it's like 28 o'clock.
Yeah.
And
It's 60 past 40 o'clock.
yeah, Roland, he shows it to Roland, expecting Roland to be like, "That's weird," and Roland's like, "Yeah, time isn't real."
I wanted to share, I don't have like a specific part of the description. I just kind of like the overall vibe of the story because it's sort of like that classic, this was a great city. And as she's describing, it's like, oh, the great ones built it. Like everything is sort of like cast in this mystery and seems like a fantasy, but it could be our future because it's a city that had
Yes.
electricity and it had planes and there was a steel bridge over the river and then something
Some
happened.
fallen advanced society.
Yeah.
There's mention of trains and Blaine the Mono. They mentioned there's a train that when it would arrive, the wind would explode. They describe a sonic boom, but they
Yeah.
describe it very strange. I do love that it is the kind of that thing in the time travel stories, for instance, going back to medieval times, hearing something described that you presently know the science behind, and you're like, oh, these guys. They leave the old people behind after a lot of talking, resting,
And warning,
and yes,
especially about Jake.
yeah, because any group, the outlaws, because this great war, once it was kind of over, groups of bandits broke off. The people in the city guard it.
Your
so people
classic
can't get in.
apocalypse
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
And anybody would want Jake because he's young. He's young enough to unlearn what he knows and learn only what he's taught.
Yeah, they really want them to go around. And I like this debate kind of goes on past this too, because and they're really deferring to Jake for this, because he's the one most in danger. And I can't remember where it is, but I love what Roland is telling the rest of them. Like, if we had more people in our group, we would put him in a box and like flank him with our guns out and go through this city. Like, that's how alarmed he is.
As they reject the offer to spend the night, even though they say, like, it must have been forever since you had a roof over your head. They say no, they move on. And Jake asks, very obvious question, why didn't we stay? And Eddie gives a surprising answer. There will always be reasons to stay. What did you think about that, Eddie's read on this situation?
I feel bad for being surprised that Eddie was so insightful. It's kind of like as soon as Jake comes on the scene, Eddie sort of becomes a big brother. Like, he grows up in an instant, just in this like small but meaningful way that I like. Oh, should we mention anything about what Mercy ends up sharing about the trains?
Oh, I was thinking of something else that we had skipped. What Roland is bequeathed as he leaves.
For sure. I forgot about that also. So let's go back to...
Okay, so yeah, real quick, Mercy basically like runs in and hugs Roland. And they're like, okay, lady. And he's like, no, it's great. This woman's beautiful and amazing. He's just like super charming and kind. And she's like, I wish I could see you. And so he lets her feel his face with her hands, and she says it's a well-made face. And I just love that moment too.
Yeah.
But they have a conversation with her because she's explaining, it's weird the way they all like put things in terms of time. Just like, oh, I think 10 years ago or 12 years ago or 7 years ago, this thing happened. And I know it was that long ago because this was happening in our lives. And I'm this age and my eyes were branded out of my head at this age. And it's just so weird. Like, they're so old the way they keep track of that. But we find out that there are or were 2 monorails. And it was about 7 years ago that she swears that she heard them. And she knows that one of the trains goes into the wastelands on the other side of the city.
But doesn't know if that one works because she's never heard it. And I like that they realize, well, if it's fast enough to make a sonic boom, it wouldn't start that fast. So they just never heard it leave before. So there's a chance it's still there.
And then they get the blessing.
Roland is given it's a cross, right?
Silver cross.
A silver cross, and told to lay it at the foot of the tower.
Yeah.
So cool.
It rules. It reminded me of Little Sisters of Illyria.
Yeah.
And I was like kind of hoping when that I knew it wasn't gonna be that design, but in my heart, I wanted it to be similar.
Yeah, so he takes the silver cross and puts it in the Horn of Eld and carries it to the tower.
Perfect. They reach the outskirts of Ludd, and all of the New Yorkers recognize the George Washington Bridge and are very confused as to why it's there. It also looks terrible. But my favorite thing is that Jake, not just kind of talking out loud, is like, why is the George Washington Bridge in Missouri? And Eddie's like, Missouri? And he's like, I mean, Midworld. Right. And then that's when we get we start learning about Kef and shared mind, because Eddie's like, you weren't with us when we found the Midworld marker. How do you know any of this? Mm-hmm. And he hasn't mentioned the details of the book yet because Roland said we'll talk about it later.
I didn't realize this initially, but the way it's written when Roland, like Jake hears Roland's voice in the house, which I mentioned, and we didn't talk about it, but Susanna hears Roland giving her guidance. They've all heard each other's voices, but it's written in such a way that I took it as just they're guiding themselves.
Yeah.
Or no, I took it as they're here. They're the ones in charge of making that voice. Like they're hearing Jake, pulls on strength from imagining Roland.
It's a metaphorical.
Yeah, thank you. Metaphorical voice. But it's not. And later he's like, hey, remember when I said this? I didn't say that. I didn't open my mouth. Yeah, it's just cool.
That is really great. Roland
What's great is all Kotets can do that.
Oh, come on.
Oh,
without me?
It wasn't appropriate. Here, I'll get here. There you go. This is a great audio bit. Me staring at you two and doing the Professor X fingers.
You mean the Andy McGee?
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Oh, also, Roland doesn't share this with the rest of them. He thinks maybe he should, but then decides to wait. But Char has a specific meaning too. Only one meaning, even though all the other words that we've talked about have multiple. The only one Char can mean is death.
Yeah, for some reason of the high speech, they're very specific about that one. So Roland says that, all right, we're at the point where all this information, we have to have this. Let's pack up and palaver for the night.
And they're like a 6-day journey from the city.
Yeah.
From this. Okay.
Well, I think they're closer because they've gotten closer to the bridge.
Okay.
But Roland says, I'll start. Eddie will pick up where I left off. Susanna will take it from there. And then we'll finally get what happened to Jake. And so he explains Katet, Kef, and the idea that the thought sharing, they can all read each other's minds in that way, but he can't because he's not from our world. Mm-hmm. Which was also, I remember there were theories about whether or not the Earth they were all pulled from was the same Earth or not.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we just solved it.
Yeah. Oh, also, my favorite part is that he speculates that Oi is also part of their Katet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he also says that he thinks he got kicked out. Maybe we mentioned this, of his Billy Bumbler tribe because he was too intelligent. He was like different. So they.
The turtle rhyme comes back up. Mm-hmm. And I like that Eddie just feels that we know we're on the path of the bear. I bet if we continued, we'd be also on the path of the turtle. And that was just a cool, again, the intuition. He's kind of figuring out how this world works and the way that Ka kind of puts it all in front of you.
Yeah, everything rhymes.
That's true. Jake tells his story and ends with showing them Charlie the Choo Choo, a book they have all owned.
So
of course
weird.
they have.
Yeah, Susanna's like, maybe that's my copy.
Which I love.
Yeah.
I do love that there is no way to prove that.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm glad that they didn't cop out by having like an inscription or some easily identifiable thing.
Everybody doesn't tattoo their ISBN numbers on their bodies like me.
Later that night, Eddie, we kind of end this section how we began this section. Eddie approaching Roland at night.
Oh, it's so cool, though, because he hears him, but he's like, hey, I almost didn't hear you, and I was about to draw my gun.
The fact that he's like, you're learning.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, you're doing a better job, because I'm not dying now.
Yeah. But Eddie can read it on Roland's face that he's like, just being nice, kind of. Like, he's like, tell that he knew he was there. And Eddie, I love this conversation. Eddie says, stop holding my ears.
Yeah.
And Roland's very confused by that. And he says, if you died in your sleep tonight, I would still go to the tower, and so would they. So stop dragging us like you're herding sheep. We're not pieces on your game board. We're part of this.
We're
Your
with you.
trouble's our trouble.
Roland failed to see that shift happen, which happened in this book, it seems,
Yeah.
because in the very first part, they're still referring to themselves to him as his reluctant companions.
Yeah. And I love that Roland says that Roland's never been good at self-deception and is
Yeah.
mad because he knows Eddie's right.
Mhm.
That's how he was seeing them.
I love too that he's like, wow, if Eddie ever feels like I've double crossed him,
Yeah.
he
He'll
will
fucking kill
he will
me.
kill me. He realized he underestimated him, and that's a dangerous thing to do
Mhm.
in a respectful way. Like it was
Yeah.
it was like, oh, Eddie has become Eddie.
Yeah. That is also thinking of the Eddie we get.
Mm-hmm.
This really is that
This
turning
is-
point
yeah.
for him. I fucking love it.
Oh, also Susanna's pregnant.
Oh yeah. Which they kind of anytime a woman touches her stomach at the sound of anything dangerous in any book ever, I know they're pregnant.
Yeah.
And she absentmindedly at the dinner is like, "Oh, danger." And then later it full says it.
And that is it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you for listening. Join us for our next episode where we will be finishing the book. For Joshua Kahn and Eve Gatto, I'm CM Alexander reminding you that denigrating free will by confusing it with Ka was worse than blasphemy. It was tiresome and stupid. Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Thank you for listening to The Wastelands Part 2. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, let us know your thoughts on Facebook or Instagram at Derry Public Radio and X at Derry Public. You can also send us an email at derrypublicradio@gmail.com. You can chat with us on Discord about Stephen King and other horror-related topics. The link for that is in our show notes. And don't forget to check out our Etsy store for merchandise, etsy.com/Derry Public Radio, and our Patreon page for bonus episodes at the $5 and up tier, patreon.com/Derry Public Radio. That's all for now, listeners. Goodbye.